Hi, I'm Mary Talbot, and I'm a sophomore, and I wrote the paper Exploring Mother Earth from a Feminist Lens. I didn't really have an opinion on the term before I started writing the paper, and as I was reading these environmental perspectives on the term, which fundamentally I do agree with, that it is a term which oversimplifies conceptions of environmental destruction and is sort of euphemistic in that way. I was also finding that the conversations surrounding the problems with the term were not using feminism, and in fact were based on really essentialized versions of motherhood and women. And at this point, although I don't feel like it's a term that's a slur or something that I would call anyone out for necessarily, I do feel like it was a jumping off point for me to explore a lot of underlying issues. I think that the problem with the way that Western American people use the term Mother Earth is that it's divorced from any spiritual or cultural meaning. So it's also a form of cultural appropriation. There are a lot of spiritualities that do incorporate really meaningful uses of the term Mother Earth. So I feel like it's difficult to say reclaim, because I guess it's about who's reclaiming it, and I think that there are appropriate uses of it, but I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable using it because it doesn't have anything to do with my belief system. It's divorced from meaning for me, which I feel like ultimately is the problem. I tried to basically follow my line of thought, which is always harder than it seems like it'll be, because the idea was very clear in my mind, but then actually laying it out was more complicated. But I tried to start with the environmental, which is really where the prompt was coming from and where the articles that we'd been pointed to were coming from. So I did talk about the environmental problems with using the term, so that it's kind of just connoting a worldview that's not realistic or constructive. But then as I was reading those articles, 2 or 3 articles written by environmentalists about why we shouldn't call it Earth Mother, which is, and their arguments were things like it's oversimplifying, and they use language like, if we call the Earth Mother, we're assuming that the Earth will clean up after us, that the Earth has an element of forgiveness and wants to forgive us and clean up after us and fix the destruction that we've been doing. And so I was feeling uncomfortable with the language that they were using about mothers, so that just seemed like a seamless thing to start with the environmental themes and then move into the feminist perspective, which I felt like was really lacking in those analyses. So that was sort of just a natural progression. And then I tried to use resources, like sources from class, to establish that I was speaking from a Western, non-spiritual perspective about the term, and that historically the women-nature connection in Western societies has not been empowering. It's been kind of an invitation for essentializing women, for exploiting the earth. So I tried to organize it as a progression of my understanding as I was writing the paper. I felt sort of horrible writing about the Giving Tree because it's so loved. But at this point, I feel like the book, it's considered very much a book about friendship and love and generosity, but now I feel like the whole premise of the book is pretty creepy and bizarre, because it's a very one-sided relationship where the boy can take as much as he wants, and that's what the tree wants, is to give everything. And the boy can come and go, and the tree gives everything for the boy, and it's a very one-sided relationship that's damaging. So at this point, I feel like my perception of the book, yeah, it's entirely changed. And the tree is presented as both his mother and representative of the earth. So I feel like it just speaks really well. I mean, it was exactly what I was looking for. It speaks really well to the ways in which we treat both the earth. We treat the earth badly, and there's not enough support for mothers, and there are very narrow expectations of what it means to be a good mother, and what your obligation is once you've had a child. Once I decided that I didn't have time for a research paper, it was a lot easier, because I really didn't want to do a half way research paper that incorporated a few quotes, it was easier because I was just working very specifically within, I have 2 or 3 ideas I want to get across in these 2 or 3 paragraphs. I want to do an analysis of the giving tree. How can I make that the central part of my paper? And then I really, for structure too, I really have to restructure a lot of what I'm writing. So that's something I'm trying to work on this year, is devoting more time to writing and less to just brainstorming. And then I also have, I exchange papers with a close friend who's also a women's studies major, who was in this class with me, and we do a lot of editing, and it's really helpful for me to be like, okay, here's what I'm trying to say. Does this paper say that? So I do a lot of paper exchanging. I really think that this paper would work better as a research paper, because I had to make the decision for length reasons and time reasons that I didn't want it to be a halfway research paper, so I really made it just an analysis paper. But I think that it would work better if I was able to incorporate more, especially more research on what I mean by saying that expectations of motherhood in America are unfair. I really wanted to talk about how there's no governmental support for child's care. I really wanted to talk about depictions of mothers in the media. I would want to support it's a big claim to make that motherhood, that there are a set of expectations on motherhood. I'm not sure that everyone would agree with that, and I think that I would want to use tangible evidence because I believe it, but I was working from a place of common knowledge rather than from a place of concrete research. The place that I was working from with this paper was intersectionality, which is a feminist tenet that we talk a lot about in women's studies and probably other majors and courses too, which is the idea that you can't just choose one theme or one oppression to focus on, that these things are interconnected. So in this example, there were environmentalists writing about the problems with the term Mother Earth from an environmental standpoint without incorporating anything about the mother half of the term. They failed to bring any feminist analysis to it at all, and in fact kind of were anti-feminist in how essentializing they were. So that to me is like a failure to incorporate intersectionality, and I'm trying to incorporate that more into my reading of things, and I'm not sure that I would have thought critically about those articles had I not been doing it for a paper.